Department Directive Number 512211, October 5th, 1993. Subject: Stars and Stripes Newspaper, Business and Operation. Purpose: the directive. The established policies, assigns, responsibilities prescribed for the Stars and Stripes organization owned by the Unified Combat Command. Consistent reference: A. 1-2 Authorize established management operation oversights of Stars and Stripes, including production, distribution authority, business operation, mission and essential activity of the Department of Defense, designated Unified Combat Commands. 1-3 Designates Director Armed Force Information Service of the Department of Defense, executive agencies for Stars and Stripes. Authorize Commander-in-Chief, U.S. European Command, and the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Pacific Command, to establish and maintain Stars and Stripes Board of Directors to address the Stars and Stripes business operation in their Unified Combat Commands. Applicability: the directive applies to the Office of Secretary of Defense, military departments, including National Guard, Chairman and Joint Chief of Staff of the Unified Combat Commands, Inspector General of the Department of Defense, and Defense Agency with the Department of Field Activities herein referred to, collective with the Department of Defense component. The term military service is used herein refers to Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. Definition terms used in directive to define an enclosure. 2-4 Policy. It is Department of Defense policy with the U.S. European Command, U.S. Pacific Command, authorized to publish authorized to publish Stars and Stripes, provided that support of Stars and Stripes Unified Combat Command and component standing commanders, public affairs staffs that should provide Stars and Stripes editorial staff same help provided with commercial newspapers in compliance with the principle governing the release of information media with the Department of Defense Directive 5122.5, reference B. Editorial policies, practices, Stars and Stripes shall be in accordance with journalist standards governed by the U.S. daily commercial newspapers on the highest quality, will emphasize the matters and interests of Stars and Stripes readership. Except as provided in paragraph 4 or 5 below, the Department of Defense policy for Stars and Stripes is that there shall be a free flow of news, information, and the readership with news management or censorship. Without news management or censorship, calculated withholding unfavorable news is prohibited. Stars and Stripes, basically self-sustaining operation. Each Stars and Stripes shall be administered within accordance with the Department of Defense Directive 1015.1, reference C, with a joint service to non-appropriated funded instrumentality, in its Unified Combat Command, except for the different procedures specified by the directive. Funding shall provide through the newspapers authorized, advertising, job printing appropriated to funded support authorized by this directive. Department of Defense Directive 1015.6, reference D, the Department of Defense Instruction 1330-18, reference E. Stars and Stripes provide important news, information, U.S. personnel and their families stationed overseas while generating non-appropriated funded revenues. Stars and Stripes personal procedures shall differ from commercial newspapers only because Stars and Stripes are U.S. government organizations that are required to operate in accordance with the following. Department of Defense Directive 5507, in reference to the federal law, the directive is effective with DoD employments of the MCM 1984, reference G, the Stars and Stripes military personnel active duty national security constraints provided with Executive Order 1295-8, reference H, overseas status of foreign agreements as applicable. Only circumstances where the news information with the non-public domain may be directed to withheld from the publication Stars and Stripes by a Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief, or when such publication involves disclosure of classified national security information would adversely affect the national security, clearly endangers the lives of U.S. personnel. With the circumstance of paragraph 4.5 through 4.5.3 may not be considered permanent, calculated withholding unfavorable Department of Defense military or the U.S. government. Only Unified Combat Command and the CINC's combat chief, combat commander-chief, and commander-in-chief may authorize withholding news information from the Stars and Stripes when the Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief directly withholds publication. Unified Combat Command shall immediately inform the Assistant Secretary of Defense Public Affairs by telephone and then forward the immediate precedence and appropriately classified message following the Secretary of Defense Washington Office of Secretary of Defense Public Affairs with information copy to the Director of the AFIS and especially Assistant Public Accountants and Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief may include appropriate AM, celeb, and AM's embassy as information addresses. Sensitivity of the host nation shall not region withhold any story with the publication of Stars and Stripes. Unified Combat Command Theater hosting nation sensitivity listed prepared with the Union Armed Force Radio Television Services and will not be used to restrict the content of Stars and Stripes, and representative of the other governments shall be interested in or concerned about content with the Stars and Stripes shall be informed that the Stars and Stripes does not represent the official position of the U.S. government, including Department of Defense and Unified Combat Command. Stars and Stripes is an unofficial objective collection of commercial news opinions available with the commercial newspapers in the United States, along with Stars and Stripes editorial staff generated Department of Defense Command and local news information. Stars and Stripes provide information to the members of the Department of Defense and their family members serving overseas and do so commercially commercially daily newspapers that are published sold throughout the United States is keeping with the principle of First Amendment to the Constitution. Appropriated funding shall be provided, required with diverse conditions, specific circumstances defined in Section 2 with the military service agreed through with the memorandum agreement detailing shared responsibilities as approved by the Office of Secretary of Defense of the Unified Combat Command's responsibilities. Assistant Secretary of Defense of Public Affairs under the Department of Directive 5122-5, reference B, the Principal Assistant Secretary of Defense for Internal Information Policy, including Stars and Stripes matters, shall provide policy broad operational guidance directive of the Armed Force Information Services, monitor and evaluate overall effectiveness policies in Section 4 above, Procedure Section 6 below. The Director of American Forces Information Service Department Directive 512210 with the reference A shall provide administrative financial direction Department of Defense executive agents of the Stars and Stripes organization, develop, issue with the oversee implementation policies and procedures, Unified Combat Command military departments of the Operations Service Stars and Stripes, provide business and policy counsel for the mission performance and financial operations of Stars and Stripes, serve as the Department of Defense point of contact with Congressional Joint Committee on Printing for Stars and Stripes matter, and coordinating Chairman and Joint Chief of Staff as the Assistant Secretary of Defense of Public Affairs, provide broad overall planning guidelines. Unified Combat Command Stars and Stripes wartime operation involve more than one area of responsibility. Chairs are required at the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense level or above. Steering Committee provided guidance to Stars and Stripes Management Action Group. Select and employ Stars and Stripes ombudsmen. Secretary of Military Department shall nominate with the most highly qualified military personnel position Stars and Stripes in conflict enclosure. 5. Enter into memorandum of agreements approved with the Unified Combat Command as required with the Office of Secretary of Defense appropriated funding, non-appropriated funding support when required by diverse conditions defined in enclosure 2. Secretary of the Army shall support non-appropriated and appropriated funding, accounting, financial reporting procedures required by the Department of Defense Instruction 7012, Reference I, Volume 13, Department of Defense 7014R, Reference J, and coordinate with the Unified Combat Command, the Director, Army Force Information Services. Designate successor interest of the Stars and Stripes as agreed upon with the applicable Unified Combat Command, the Director, Army Force Information Services. Commander of the Chief of the European Command and Commander in the U.S. Pacific Command shall authorize Stars and Stripes, the newspaper provided operational direction, Stars and Stripes Commander, publisher with the support of Stars and Stripes Chief of the Unified Combat Command area responsibility consistent with each organization status category B non-appropriated funding instrument. Provided Unified Combat Command regulation guidance needed to carry out the directive of the established procedure to resolve the situation. U.S. ambassadors, if so, designated with the chief of the mission, believe that a specific issue with his or her nation responsibility not already public domain through within our own news sources would violate national security or endanger safety of the American citizens, other persons under jurisdiction, if were to be published in the Stars and Stripes. Select Stars and Stripes Commander, Publisher, Other, Military Officer, Secretary, Stars and Stripes Positions, Aid, Stars and Stripes Commander, Publisher, Educate Stars and Stripes, Editorial Staff about Mission, Unified Combat Command, and Military Service Component Commands. Approved selection of Stars and Stripes Editor, establish, maintain Stars and Stripes Board of Editors to address Stars and Stripes business operations, establish, maintain Stars and Stripes readership forms, which may be taken in many forms, address Stars and Stripes matters interest. The forms are provided with community feedback to the Stars and Stripes. This will enable Stars and Stripes Commander and Publisher and the Stars and Stripes Editor to better understand thereby better serving interest in the readers. As the direction Unified Combat provide meetings between Stars and Stripes Commander and Publisher, Stars and Stripes Editor of the Unified Combat Command, Public Affairs Office of the Unified Combat Command, Components Command, Representative of the Director of Public Affairs, discuss the President, performance of the Stars and Stripes, performance related to Public Affairs, the Unified Combat Command, and the Component Command. Stars and Stripes may be invite attendees they choose, representing the Armed Forces Information System in service. Information Service may attend. These meetings may not serve as the Editorial Advisory Board, Unified Combat Command, and Component Commands represent the principal serve the prominent subject of the Stars and Stripes self-generated news coverage. Consequently, an involvement and appearance with involvement by Component Command staff in the Stars and Stripes editorial policy creates unacceptable conflict, interest, and damaging editorial integrity, credibility of Stars and Stripes. Ensure that the Stars and Stripes Commander, Publisher, assume the duty responsible for the command, leadership, and the management of the Stars and Stripes, execute with the Department of Defense Unified Combat Command policy, is responsible for the Unified Combat Command and Commander-in-Chief for Stars and Stripes operation include the newspaper publication, timely circulation, job printing activities associated with distribution related to the relevant Unified Combat Command area with the responsibility to provide planning, execution, and issue with the ensure of the U.S. Armed Forces during contingency operations named armed conflict. Stars and Stripes Commander Publishers identify the wartime contingency of Stars and Stripes personnel and asset requirements to Unified Combat Command to fulfill Unified Combat Command forces responsible during armed conflict. Select Stars and Stripes Editor. Approve of the coordinated Stars and Stripes Editor military personnel. Selects D's for Stars and Stripes editorial staff. See enclosure 5. Provide a current status and briefing the 2-year financial forecast for the Director of Army Force Information System Annual Army Force Information for the Stars and Stripes meeting. Provide support Stars and Stripes Board of Directors required in enclosure 7. Conduct frequent independent relations surveys, including in accordance with the Department of Directives and Department of Defense Instructions 1113 reference K, readership focus groups to gather information. Other Unified Combat Commander-in-Chiefs will ensure that the deployment and extra of contingency wartime planning documents reflect Stars and Stripes transportation funding reimbursement in-theater distribution requirements applicable to the information. Copies such as planning document annexes shall be furnished in the following: U.S. European Command attends Director of Public Affairs, U.S. Public Pacific Command attends Director of Public Affairs, Army Force Information Service attend Director Printed Media. Procedure. Authority to establish Stars and Stripes Operations. Secretary of Defense, Assistant Secretary of Defense, Public Affairs Directors, Armed Force Information Service, the Unified Combat Command shall forward requests of the Director to the Armed Force Information Service. The record required class information shall be redacted in accordance with the Department Directive 5201 and Department of Defense 5201R, reference 1 L and M. Stars and Stripes of the Stars and Stripes business operations shall conform with the applicable regulations, laws involving libel, copyright, U.S. government, printing and postal regulations, Department of Defense personnel policies and procedures. With concurrency, Unified Combat Command, Stars and Stripes to authorize direct communication military for the Stars and Stripes personal matters with the Department of Army. Stars and Stripes financial matters. Stars and Stripes shall keep the Unified Combat Command Army Force Information System involved in all actions. Management Review Evaluation Director of the Armed Force Information System provides business counsel assistance, policy oversight. Stars and Stripes for Stars and Stripes, the Director of Armed Forces Information Service shall meet annually. Unified Combat Command representative includes Stars and Stripes Commander, Publisher, Senior Defense Official with the Stars and Stripes responsibilities such as Stars and Stripes Management Activity Groups. District Army Force Information System shall be assisted with the Stars and Stripes Management Action Group. Compromise the Senior Representative of the Armed Forces Information Service Office of the Secretary of Defense Force Management Policy and the Department of Defense Office of the Authority Expertise aid the Stars and Stripes problems As needed, the Director, Armed Force Information System may organize Department of Defense Steering Committee to oversee the Stars and Stripes Management Action Group to address specific concerns identified with the Director of the Army Force Information System and Unified Combat Commanders-in-Chief. In accordance with the Department Director, the Department of Defense Instruction 7606, Reference and standards and strips shall be audited on an annual basis. Audits shall perform audits, make financial in nature with the scope of the government auditing standard of the Comptroller General of the United States. Each annual audit shall determine whether the prior authority recommendations have been implemented with the region have not been implemented with the IG and Inspector General of the Department of Defense elects. Forming an audit with the Stars and Stripes organization. Such audit may substitute with the required annual audit. Stars and Stripes organization shall coordinate the audit requirements with each other in Army Community Family Support Center to maximize extent practical to avoid duplication, costs, increase the efficiency, effectiveness of these audits. Information copy of the audit contractor reports forwarded to the Stars and Stripes Unified Combat Command Armed Forces investigation in the AAA. The Stars and Stripes provide responsibility the audit. The Unified Commander Combat Chief with 60 days receiving the completed record. Stars and Stripes responsible for the audit must indicate with the concurrency of the non-concurrency each finding recommendations. For each occurrence of the corrective actions taken plan should be described in completion dates the actions already taken as well. The estimated dates completion of the planned action shall be provided. Each non-current specific reason must be stated. The appropriate alternative method accomplishing desired improvements may be proposed. If non-occurrence and non-concurrence findings recommendations cannot be resolved with the Stars and Stripes Management Auditors, the AAA endorses the contract findings recommendation resulting procedure. The Department was established in the Department of Defense Directive 7653, reference all in Army regulations should be filed with the Unified Combat Command, shall forward the responsible Director, Army Force Investigation Information Services, and the AA. 7. Information requirements. For the reporting requirements of Section 6 above, and Enclosure 4 shall be submitted within the Department of Directive 7012, reference I, and 7606, reference N, unless specifically expected with the Director. 8. Summary of changes to change the issue with administrative undated language comply with Executive Order 1416-8, reference AA. Effective date, implementation. Director effective immediately. Forward one copy and implement documents for the Assistant Secretary of Defense, Public Affairs within 180 days. And then we have William J. Perry, Deputy of the Secretary of Defense. References, we have funding morale, welfare, recreation, programs, resale, active, concluded, and non-appropriated fundings other than military exchange, standard conduct, manual court martials, national security information, financial management, moral welfare, recreation activities, Department of Defense Financial Management Regulation, Volume 13, non-appropriated fundings and policy, survey, the Department of Defense personnel, Department of Defense Information Security Program Regulation, audit, non-appropriated funding, instrumentality related activities, follow-up, General Accounting Office of the Department of Inspection and Internal Audit Reports, Private Organization, DOD Installation, DOD Official Mail, Government Printing, Binding and Regulations, Military Warfare, Morale, Welfare, Recreation Activities, Armed Force Professional Entertainment Overseas, Armed Force Radio and Television Services, Programs, Military Welfare, Recreation, Defense Hotline Program, Reporting Counterinsurgency, Criminal Violations, Department of Defense Freedom of Information Act Program, United States Code, Freedom of Information Act, Executive Order Defending Women of Gender Ideology, Extremism, Restoring Biological Truth of the Federal Government, and definitions. Adverse conditions that may adversely affect the survival of the newspaper troop drawdown, increased troop population, concurrent fluctuation, inflation, armed conflict, national contingency deployment, and others. Stars and Stripes, the organization, perform administrative and editorial business operation, including newspaper job printing plans as necessary to do the mission. Stars and Stripes, the title one, both depending on the context of the use of the newspaper produced by Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes commander, publisher of the senior position. Stars and Stripes responsible for simultaneously performing dual function. Military office command of Stars and Stripes will be Sun would also serve as the publisher of the Stars and Stripes, producer of the organization, Stars and Stripes editor, senior civilian position on the newspaper editorial staff, senior Stars and Stripes, at which he or she is assigned. All the mention of the editor is the director of the refers exclusively in the position unless otherwise specified. Stars and Stripes Managed Action Group and Stars and Stripes Steering Committee. These are ad hoc joint committees of the Office of Secretary of Defense Public Affairs and Office of Secretary of Defense FMP address Stars and Stripes personal business policy. Stars and Stripes Management Action Group, chaired by the Office of Secretary of Defense Public Affairs. Army Force Information Service members include members of the Office of Secretary of Defense of the FMP, others Department of Defense Office for the Authority Expertise to address Stars and Stripes Pelhams, Director of the Armed Force Information Service, Deputy Assistant Secretary, Office Secretary of Defense, FMP, serves as chairman of Stars and Stripes Steering Committee that addresses the Department of Defense level Stars and Stripes issues. Neither does the Department of Defense Stars and Stripes Steering Committee nor the Stars and Stripes Management Action Group involve themselves in Stars and Stripes editorial policies. Stars and Stripes Ombudsman, highly qualified journalist hired from the outside of the Department of Defense in terms of 3 years, independently advised the Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief, the Stars and Stripes Command, publisher, Stars and Stripes editorial director of the Army Force Information Services, Congress matters of readership and interest of Stars and Stripes. Right, the mission. General, the Stars and Stripes organization contributed to overall U.S. Joint Defense mission, oversee with providing news, information, armed force, internal audiences, serving Unified Combat Command, responsibility deployed, support the designated joint services, exercise contingency operation situations of armed conflict that shall be done with the Operation Daily newspaper. Stars and Stripes coverage of the news information make possible to continue to exercise relation responsibility, citizenship, Department of Defense of the personnel family, oversee the Stars and Stripes of the publisher, oversee the during peacetime contingency operation armed conflicts, shall provide same range international, national, regional news, opinion with the commercial sources from commercial sources as provided by newspapers of the United States. Additionally, to better serve the readers, Stars and Stripes shall pay special attention to new local host country conditions relevant to their audience, shall provide through their reports and bureaus, news to local military communities in the theater, news of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, military service of the leaders, operation not unique, usually available to the readers outside of the commercial sources. Stars and Stripes are served with the interests of the overseer of the Department of Defense, reader for the prominent with the commercial daily newspaper of the United States. Stars and Stripes job shop printing. Stars and Stripes are authorized to operate job shop printings to include book publishing, printing with the Unified Combat Command, U.S. Military Community Newspaper, military organization, non-appropriated funding, morale, warfare, and recreation activity, private organization, interest in the concern of the Department of Defense is designated with the Department of Department of Defense Instruction 1015, Reference P, the Department of Defense employees and the immediate families otherwise designated Unified Combat Command. Wartime mission and contingency operations. Stars and Stripes provide Stars and Stripes on a daily basis transportation to and administer for the designated the areas of operational request of funding with the responsible of the Unified Combat Command chain of commander. Commander in respect of the Unified Combat Command owning Stars and Stripes organization of the Unified Combat Command shall plan and require to airlift the timely basis interest or distribution daily Stars and Stripes newspaper as part of their operational planning documents. Interest distribution required to airlift Stars and Stripes shall be responsible of supported Unified Combat Command and Chairman Chief and Commander-in-Chief of the respective component commands shall reimburse the Stars and Stripes non-region sales per issue basis when deployed in the area. Operation of the Stars and Stripes reporters shall operate with the same manner with the commercial media representative they deployed. Stars and Stripes reporters shall be eligible to participation in Department of Defense Command sponsored regional local media pools. Business Financial Operation, the Director of the Armed Force Information Service shall administer the Stars and Stripes Central Financial Management Stars and Stripes Organizational Authority allocated to distribute non-appropriated and appropriated funded resources between organizations. Stars and Stripes shall report with the prescribed of the Department of Direct Instruction 7012 of the reference title of the providing information copies to the Unified Combat Command Director of Armed Forces and Information Services. The Stars and Stripes authorized non-appropriated funding support over the Category B with the non-appropriated funding provided by the Department of Directive 10.15.6 reference D. Stars and Stripes shall fund to the maximum extent possible through the sale of the distribution, newspaper, job printing, authorized of advertising revenues of the authorized sources of the revenue approved by the Department of Defense and Congress. Appropriated funding support shall be kept at the minimum consistent with the Stars and Stripes mission, and the Secretary of the Army shall be the Department of Defense executive and non-appropriated funding support of the Stars and Stripes. The first condition will occur with the Director of the Armed Force Information Services must supply the Secretary of the Army with non-appropriated funding support. Other military services provide with a proportionate funding support with the memorandum of agreement to continue funding procedure coordinated with the Director of the Army Force Information Services complies. Copies of the agreement shall be provided with all concerned parties. Stars and Stripes and Stars and Stripes commercial resale publications may be made available to Unified Combat Command and U.S. government agency members, U.S. government contractors, or approved the Unified Combat Command. Stars and Stripes systems and accounting internal controls shall conform to the requirements of the Department of Defense Regulation Reference 7014R, Reference J, Army Regulation, War, Welfare, Recreation Activities, non-appropriated funding instrument, non-appropriated funding accounting policy and procedures. Stars and Stripes shall ensure that the quarterly reports furnished for the Unified Combat Command, Stars and Stripes Board of Directors, and Director of the Armed Forces Investigation Information Services. Appropriated funding in addition with the reference to the Stars and Stripes authorized appropriated funding support has provided by the United States under Secretary of Defense for the control of the direct funding support with adverse condition makes such funding necessary for the ensure the survival of the newspaper, the impairment with the mission capability for reach and error with the news transportation newspaper, oversee with the transportation of things authorized joint with the non-appropriated funding instrument and electrical, optical, satellite transmission of the newspaper, the long distances required by the mode with ensure the timely and recovery and economical delivery. As required by the transporter Stars and Stripes officially designated with a remote isolated location, Unified Combat Command may authorize the Department of Defense mail postage remotely isolated locations if the action required to ensure timely delivery. Each Stars and Stripes shall annually review the mailing support, minimize appropriated funding expenditure for the U.S. Postal Regulations apply Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes shall use the in-house for the non-postal means of transportation distribute the newspaper in an area that is non-designated remote isolated. Stars and Stripes authorized official and managerial administrator of the mail related exclusively to the business U.S. government in accordance with the Department of Defense Manual 4525 AM, Chapter 3, Section 008, Reference Q. Such official man will be authorized to support with the archive of the responsible of the United States as a designated with the Army Force Information. Such official mail with the Stars and Stripes of the Department of Defense of the Congress. Official mail is not authorized to provide Stars and Stripes to the general readership or to the support of the in-theater distribution Stars and Stripes resale commercial publication for transportation, military, public personnel, incidents of the mission, essential travel required with the military training, participation, contingency operation, military field exercise, for reforger and team spirit, or into other areas of armed conflict. In times of armed conflict and national contingency deployment, directive of the Chairman, the Joint Chief of Staff of the Production, Free Distribution, Stars and Stripes as forces are designated. Unified Combat Command shall endeavor to provide Stars and Stripes to other Stars and Stripes serve with the Department of Defense personnel engaged in military operation, emergency operation exercise in the most expeditious manner possible is required for the participate in command of the requesting Unified Combat Command shall be responsible for distribution Stars and Stripes within theater operation. These services are provided with a reimbursable basis of Stars and Stripes. And other agreements are made with the Unified Combat Command with the Department of Defense military departments. Non-appropriated funding, Stars and Stripes, and non-appropriated funding should be invested in the American Army's banking investment program in accordance with the Department of Direct Instruction 7012 of the reference side of the implement Army regulations. Each Stars and Stripes shall participate in Army risk management insurance program in accordance with the Army regulation. Advertising. Stars and Stripes are authorized to solicit and sell and publish, circulate, run off of the newspaper to display with the advertising paid classified ad, the supplemental section, advertise with the included price and brand names, products and services related with the coupons, implementation of advertise authority with shall be specified with the Director of the Armed Forces Information Services. Stars and Stripes may sell with commercial advertising agencies, run off with the paper advertising the Department of Defense recruiting, retention programs, and activities. Stars and Stripes have the right to refuse any advertising. Stars and Stripes may publish news stories on the special DoD affiliate with the tours and entertainment opportunity with the Department of Defense personnel. Defendants according to the Department of Defense Instruction 1015-2 and 1330-13 references S and T. The Stars and Stripes may promote Stars and Stripes authorized advertisement giant printing services except appropriated funding. The Stars and Stripes also may promote literacy, health, safety, and other community service issues. Stars and Stripes promote Army Force radio, television services, scheduled program services in their newspaper. Stars and Stripes shall incorporate Armed Force radio, television service outlet to promote each other on the programs and serve with the authorized Department of Defense Directive 51-2020, reference U. As a newspaper operated with the Department of Defense, Stars and Stripes may not contain any material implied with the Department of Defense components over the subordinate levels in the favor of the special commercial individual owned product or commodity or service. Subscribe even at no cost to a commercial feature, wire, or other service with the primary purpose of its advertisement, promotional, commercial product, commodities, or services. Carry any advertisement imply the discrimination, race, age, origin, sex policy, religion, or physical characteristics that include health. Trademark. The Stars and Stripes shall trademark the Stars and Stripes in overseas areas when it's distributed. Personal policies and procedures. General, non-appropriated funding employment policies. Stars and Stripes shall have the personal system, business-oriented term, personal management concept system shall provide maximum authority accountability with the Stars and Stripes managers at a level indefinite to improve the productivity of the system with award bonuses, high-performance employees. Stars and Stripes non-appropriated funding employee with the government code for the U.S. Army non-appropriated funded regulations except with the exemption of the general policy have granted the Unified Combat Command and Army Force information service of the U.S. Army with the Stars and Stripes. As DoD employees, Stars and Stripes civilian personnel shall abide with the Department of Defense Directive 5507 and reference F with the Department of Defense Unified Combat Command, U.S. Army regulations, U.S. laws governing employees, the applicable host nation law, applicability, SOFA, requirements, and Stars and Stripes commander publishers shall ensure that the Stars and Stripes employees are made aware of these provisions before being hired and the employees receive the adequate personal training. Stars and Stripes endeavor to recruit civilian personnel with a soul with experience, solid experience with the education, performance, credential required for the business, publishing, editorial discipline. Stars and Stripes, as part of the hiring practice, shall specify with the government employment that includes responsibilities such as the Department of Defense Directive 5507 and reference F, so that the Stars and Stripes civilian employees are fully aware of the obligation of the Department of Defense employees. Appropriated funding personnel assignment authority, appropriated funding manpower staffing with the operate manage the support with the Stars and Stripes authorized with the Department of Defense Directive 1015-4 reference 5. Military officer personnel procedure. Candidates for the Stars and Stripes military officer position shall be nominated with the military service through the Director of Armed Forces Information Service, Unified Combat Commander in Chief, who shall make the final selection. Stars and Stripes military officer proper positions consider for the nomination shall be the Stars and Stripes commander publisher and the deputy of the commander. The Stars and Stripes commander publisher shall have the military public affairs and joint service experience with a journalism degree. Stars and Stripes officer supervision business operations shall have the experience with the Department of Defense control function, familiar with laws, regulations applicable to the Department of Defense non-appropriated funded instrument business operation master degree with the business administrative is desirable but not mandatory. Instead of the advanced degree with the military public experience of the nominees must also read with the Unified Combat Commanders and Chief of the Armed Forces Information Service subsidy with the Department of Defense funded training within the industry program comparable with the newspaper operation. United States Unified Combat Command shall forecast in the military vacancies in the Stars and Stripes to allow time in the military for the nomination process completed with provided education from the Stars and Stripes assignment. Military services shall provide high qualified officers for the Stars and Stripes assignment at the required grade levels. Military officers selected for the duty of the Stars and Stripes commander and commander publisher shall undergo the training within the industry program. Provide real-world training with a commercial newspaper. The program was administered for the Director of Armed Forces Information Systems coordinated with the military service of the Unified Combat Command. Enlisted members of the Stars and Stripes editorial staff, enlisted military personnel shall be assigned with the Stars and Stripes editorial staff will reflect the Unified Combat Command Joint Manpower Program. Documents and nominative base for the military shall be nominated with the most nature of the professional personnel of the assignment of the Stars and Stripes editorial staff required with the Joint Manpower Program greater experience level according with the Unified Combat Command Director, Armed Force Information Services. Nominations shall be considered with a competitive basis. Stars and Stripe Commander, publishers, and Stars and Stripe editor of the Stars and Stripes shall request the nomination 18 months before projected billet vacancies. Military shall be forward nomination 6 to 10 months in advance of Stars and Stripe. Since Stars and Stripe Commander, publisher of the military shall provide Stars and Stripes reasonable overlap military and listed with the members serving the Stars and Stripe editorial staff. Stars and Stripe Commander publishers shall coordinate with the Unified Combat Command to ensure that there is an appropriate mixture of the military with the billets into adjustment representing the Stars and Stripes to preserve the rendition of the Stars and Stripes as joint service newspapers. Enclosure 6, Editorial Operations. Stars and Stripes shall serve the interests of the oversee of the Department of Defense readership of the commercial daily newspaper that serve the reader of the United States, however, the U.S. government, the government organization, Stars and Stripes, the newspaper, news staff shall take no independent editorial position. Stars and Stripes editorial practice policy shall be in accordance with the high standard of American journalism. Stars and Stripes. Editor concurrence with the Stars and Stripes Commander, publisher, Unified Combat Command, owners of the newspaper may establish a standard code of the personal, professional ethics, general editorial principles similar to the one that developed in major metropolitan newspapers or by basic journalists in organizations such as Secretary Professional Journalists. These codes usually stress the following: responsibility of the newspaper fully informing the readership, freedom of the press, commitment of the personal and professional ethics, emphasis of the content, of the accuracy, objective, fair representation of the issue of the sides of it on the issue. We develop copies of the code style of the guides provided with the Unified Combat Commander in Chief and Director of the Armed Force Information Services. Stars and Stripe editors are responsible for developing editorial procedure that required with the style guide mirrors daily use in commercial newspapers. Editorial content Stars and Stripes shall be governed by the general principle applicable to the quality commercial press with the follows presentation of news. The purpose of the Stars and Stripes is to provide news information with the varied sources, aids for the Department of Defense military members, and the family station overseas to exercise the democratic citizenship responsibilities. Commercially contracted news and feature of the opinion columns of the Stars and Stripes purchase the contract for and carry news stories, features, syndicated columns, comic strips, and editorial cartoons of commercial sources. Wire service news information feature material that may be edited in accordance with source contracts and space requirement. Stars and Stripes reflect the news of the day being carried in with comparable to U.S. commercial daily newspaper. The issue reflect different sides of the issue over a reasonable amount of time. Staff-generated copy. And keep its established major daily commercial newspaper in the United States with a staff-generated news feature for the Stars and Stripes shall accurately, factually, impartially, objectively news stories. Feature material shall distinguish between fact and opinion. Every effort shall be made to the attributed quotation fact to identify sources. In the case of controversial and sensitive stories, Stars and Stripes editor with his or her designee shall assume and identify confidential sources as required by the normal journalistic practice to ensure sources of the credible. Stars and Stripes may use the normal range journalistic techniques, including people on the street interviews. Techniques does not constitute a political poll. Political campaign news. Stars and Stripes shall publish coverage of the U.S. political campaigns for commercial news sources. From commercial news sources. Presentation of political campaign news should be made impartial, unbiased, and nonpartisan basis, reflecting DoD policies and endorsement of any specific candidate for the elected office. Every effort should be made to ensure that Stars and Stripes reflect full spectrum campaign news being published in the United States national candidates issue. Stars and Stripes support the federal voting assistance program by carrying factual information registration voting laws. Stars and Stripes shall provide balance of commercial syndicated columns. Stars and Stripes may not take independent editorial position. Balanced selection of syndicated opinion columns shall be published over the reasonable time period. The presentation syndicated editorial cartoons should reflect the full spectrum of the typical editorial cartoons published throughout the United States. Stars and Stripes commanders and publishers shall provide Unified Combat Commander annual assurance that their required balanced syndicated opinion columns have been met. has been met. Administrative, the Stars and Stripes comply with the Department of Defense Directive 1113, reference K on poll surveys, straw votes. Stars and Stripes may conduct a poll, survey, exit polls, and straw vote on any political campaign. Stars and Stripes may publish in polls, surveys, and straw votes furnished from the newspaper the contracted wire services. Stars and Stripes may not conduct lottery games. Stars and Stripes shall have the following disclaimer placed in the masthead and extreme bottom one of the prominent pages, segregated with a copy in the box. Editorial: Stars and Stripes news staff are authorized to gather the report news, good and bad. The Department of Defense has subordinate commands, all reporting necessary requirements on the investigation, and journalists, commercial newspaper, Stars and Stripes news staff members have the right and need to ask questions except for the responsible for fulfilling Stars and Stripes missions. However, Stars and Stripes is not authorized to investigate agencies such as military law enforcement agencies, investigative bodies, and the Inspector General, and shall have not a function in the capacity. All the Department of Defense employees, Stars and Stripes news staff members must adhere Department of Defense personal policies, may use unapplied journalists employed with the commercial newspapers. They may not usually apply to journalists employed by the commercial newspapers must comply with the Department of Defense Directive 5507 and the reference F, Apple to the MCM 1984 reference G. Since most journalistic reporting investigators' nature investigative reporting such as not banned, Stars and Stripes reporters have the same need to ask questions of the sources, expect response to do commercial newspaper journalism. While Stars and Stripes staff cannot conduct independent investigation, fall under the jurisdiction of various military law enforcement designated investigation agencies. Stars and Stripes may report on an open or completed investigation by agencies authorized to perform investigation functions. If Stars and Stripes employees know unlawful criminal actions performance duty, they must report the incident immediately to the Stars and Stripes commander publisher and to their immediate supervisor in accordance with the reference F, who shall publish with the reference F of the applicable with the Department of Defense Directive 7051, Department of Defense or Act Instruction 5244, reference W and X. If there is an authorized investigation, Stars and Stripes reporter, editor cannot protect the source as confidential when the information may be required to complete the investigation. Coverage of an investigation from the news perspective should be based on the case progress, resolution provided by investigation agency conducted newsworthy by Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes editorial procedure shall not prohibit the publishing news, independent investigation furnished by commercial media through therefore in public domain. Stars and Stripes staff may not knowingly place classified information. Stars and Stripes staff generated material that does not apply to public domain information attributed to the commercial contracted news and feature of opinion columns. Stars and Stripes editorial staff shall receive the same treatment as commercial media. Stars and Stripes reporters shall have the same right to questions, to gain, help, have access, attend gatherings available to reporters from the commercial media. Commanders and public affairs may not use U.S. government status of Stars and Stripes reporters to block or release access otherwise releasable news, information, or events. Under the same circumstances, Stars and Stripes reporters may not use U.S. government status credentials to gain special treatment, access restricted areas, gathering other advantages that may give it equally to civilian media. To keep in with principle of information, Department of Directive 5122 L5 reference B, governing release of information commercial media. The Department of Defense components are expected to be made available timely, accurate information so that Stars and Stripes news staff and the readers may assess, and understand the facts of the military organization, national defense strategy, business statutory requirements. Information should be made fully, readily available. The principal release information to be issued with the Secretary of Defense. Government organization may not file a request information against the government organized the Department of Defense Directive 5407, reference Y, Implementation Freedom of Information Act, reference Z, in the Department of Defense responsibility of all the commands on the Department of Defense principal information, particularly regarding the intent, open access that described with the reference Y with the respondent of the queries, the Stars and Stripes reporters. To meet organizational responsibility, Stars and Stripes editor of the Stars and Stripes commander, publisher, Stars and Stripes staff members select should meet frequently area commander and public affairs officer staff to confer as their counterpart U.S. commercial daily newspaper, local government, community interest representative. When matters interest Stars and Stripes readership can cut across the Unified Combat Command component command responsibility. Stars and Stripes headed over the many special project reporting teams to examine such concern for the area of the Stars and Stripes interest of military experts for fast breaking news affecting the entire Unified Combat Command community. Policy required by the greater individual regular reporter effort. Stars and Stripes editor of the Stars and Stripes commander publisher can gain help by keeping the Unified Combat Command component command public affairs office informed of the need of the theater-wide assistance. Such aid could help dispel moral damaging rumors. Sergeant Stripe conducted the readership of the survey at least once every 3 years with the Unified Combat Command. Sergeant Stripe, the edition of the such formal survey is conducted in accordance with the Department of Directive Instruction. Survey, Department of Defense Instruction 1113, reference K. Sergeant Stripe makes shorter marker surveys, bookstore operations determine changing readership and interest. Sergeant Stripe is also encouraged to make frequent use of readership focus groups throughout the Unified Combat Command. Sergeant Stripe review commercial entertainment relevant where it support reading readership interests. All Bureau personnel field reporters of Stars and Stripes newsroom experience before being independent assignments. Stars and Stripes military reporters may wear military civilian clothes at discretion of Stars and Stripes commander publisher. If authorized, Stars and Stripes commander publisher, Stars and Stripes military members may be authorized clothing allowance in accordance with the individual service directives. Stars and Stripes are both authorized to maintain a Washington D.C. bureau located other Correspondence Bureau, Office of Secretary of Defense, Public Affairs Correspondence Corridor. A desk will be provided to each of the Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes shall select the most qualified reporters possible for the assignment to the Bureau. A joint memorandum of understanding with the personal support will be established between the two newspapers and approved with the Unified Combat Command with a copy of the directive of the Army Force Information Services. Enclosure 7. The Stars and Stripes Board of Directors, Organization and Management. Stars and Stripes Board of Directors, Unified Combat Command shall provide with the Stars and Stripes Management recommended with the guidance of the Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief and all business operation attends the Director Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief. Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief is designated with the designation of the Chairman, Stars and Stripes Boards and Board of Directors. Each Stars and Stripes Board of Directors shall include the member of the Unified Combat Command, Office of Public Affairs, and Combat Patrol. At least one member of each of the Unified Combat Service components of members shall be appointed with the Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief for 2 years to ensure the continuity shall be behalf of the qualified personnel available to business-related discipline. Members of the shall be graded with the OF and GS-12 or higher of the Unified Combat Command Senior Service Stars and Stripes. Senior representative of the Stars and Stripes Board of Members should not be members of any other Stars and Stripes forums of the Council's representative of the Armed Force Information Service. One Stars and Stripes may attend the meetings of the other Stars and Stripes Board of Directors. The observation included the meetings. They are not voting members. Recommendation approved of the Stars and Stripes Board of Directors may be the incorporated Unified Command, Unified Combat Command, Stars and Stripes Instructor Directive is applicable. Stars and Stripes Board of Directors should meet at least 3 times each year, but the minutes of each meeting shall be approved of the Unified Combat Command. They approve of the Stars and Stripes Board recommendations and incorporated permanent policy with the Unified Combat Command. Stars and Stripes implementation instructions or directives with such recommendations. After the DoD policy, the Unified Combat Command shall have the Director of Armed Force Information Services resolution. Stars and Stripes Commander Publisher shall provide sufficient documentation to Stars and Stripes Board members between meetings to inform ongoing business operations and execution financial actions. Functions. Stars and Stripes Board of Directors shall monitor planning and execution of Stars and Stripes business activities. Stars and Stripes Board of Directors shall aid the Stars and Stripes Commander Publisher with the evaluation of external factors impacting Stars and Stripes adverse conditions as recommended by the Stars and Stripes Commander Publisher, Stars and Stripes Board of Directors, and Unified Commander and Combat Commander-in-Chief. Especially Stars and Stripes Commander Publisher provide financial planning shall include the capital expenditure budget, 2-year forecast, Stars and Stripes budget, Board of Directors, Evaluation Recommendation, Unified Combat Commander-in-Chief. Stars and Stripes shall also forecast, get approval of the building construction projects through Stars and Stripes Board of Directors. Stars and Stripes shall maintain 5-year business strategic corporate plan that shall be forwarded. Stars and Stripes Board of Directors, Unified Combat Command shall forward the ongoing strategic corporate plan, the directive of the Armed Force Information Service, the overall Department of Defense strategic goals. And that was the Department of Defense Directive number 5122-11, Stars and Stripes newspaper and business operations.